Time now for our big stories. And we contemplate this morning. Former President Mahama, current President Nana Addo and Akufo-Addo, who has the edge when it comes to the fight against corruption? Who has done better? Yesterday, the president resurrected that one more time when he was inaugurating the Law House, or at least spoke at that event. We'll be contemplating that, but we want to start with our guest on the Law House itself, what it signifies, what this will do, not just for legal education and the justicial system in Ghana, but what it represents on a much broader perspective, or in a much broader perspective. Joining us for that conversation, we have none other than, interestingly, the Deputy Attorney General, Alfred Tua-Yeboah. A very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, my brother.
It's been a while. I mean, since the last time, I'll not mention where, but we've not seen each other in a while. It's really good having you join the conversation this morning.
Yes, my brother. Maybe I'll let others know you were my classmate at the learning program, and I enjoyed it in class. So maybe I have to let the cat out of the bag.
I was trying to avoid that, but you've already done that anyway. We also have Dr. John Osai Kwapong. He's a CDD fellow. He joins the conversation as well. Dr. Kwapong, Osai Kwapong, a very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning to you too.
All right. Let's start with the significance of this recent edifice that was inaugurated yesterday. All the way it goes back over a decade, almost 2 decades in the making. I'll start with you, Mr. Tua-Yeboah. What is your reflection on the Law House and what it signifies for Ghana?
All right, thank you very much, my brother. Let me first and foremost commend His Excellency the President, the government, and the people of Ghana for making available to the Office of Attorney General the taxpayers' money for the construction of this edifice. I think all of us have contributed, and as was said yesterday, this project started the early part of 2000. And let me also commend all successive attorney generals and all successive presidents for also showing the commitment to have this edifice come to being. Now, if you look at our Constitution, Article 88, it talks about the Attorney General and his function. And if I will not sound as if I just want people to know more about our office, that is the only office created under the Constitution that if the President does not even want to appoint any minister, the Constitution has made it imperative for the President to appoint an Attorney General who also be the Minister of Justice. And so the Office of Attorney General houses the principal legal advisor, and as we know, all the processes that we have in the country bordering on legality. It is the duty of the AG and his officers to advise the government. So it is in right order for such an edifice to be built for the Office of Attorney General so that we can enhance our work as an office. Now, Ghana, when it comes to our standing in the Community of Nations, when it comes to democracy, Ghana stands very tall. So this edifice is a testament of Ghana's commitment to strengthen legal architecture, which eventually will lead to deepening the rule of law. And so for the starters, I may want to say that it's going to enhance the work of our officers in the ministry. I hope you've been to our ministry before, and at the point in time, some of our attorneys were using containers as their offices. People may want to work, but need to work in a very good environment. With this new office, we can accommodate all the attorneys, and God willing, even recruit more attorneys to enhance the work of the ministry.
Now, in terms of legal and judicial matters, the president also lauded the fact that this was a digital edifice, if you like. In terms of the digital drive, lawyers and litigants, quoting him, can now file their documents online, access case information, and receive updates on their cases in real time. And he talks about how this is a major leap forward in making justice more accessible and efficient for all Ghanaians. Walk us through how exactly this will happen. We know about the construct of our legal system and how people feel some cases take too long in court and all of that. How is the Law House going to aid in facilitating all of this?
Yes, I think the President made a general statement regarding both the judiciary and the Office of Attorney General.
Right.
When it comes to the filing of court processes, as we know, some parts in Accra and other parts of the country now we do e-filing, a system where you don't have to go and file the hard copy. Yeah. You can just sit in your office and file processes. A system where you can sit in your office as a lawyer and you'll be served with a court process. Coming to the Office of Attorney General, we also do a lot of legal work for the government. Sometimes instant legal actions, at times we defend. We also prosecute. And so this edifice and the idea to digitalize that office, it will mean that it's going to enhance our work. We can sit in our offices, file processes before the court. And so the system where you go to court and the case is that you've not filed it or you filed it and someone has not received the process, if you're able to go through all these processes, it will mean that you sit in your office at the Attorney General's office, file a process, and if, for example, I'm using one law chamber, story as law will have to be served, they will just be in the office and also have to get the process served. So that agenda to digitalize the judicial process and the legal process effectively will also enhance transparency to speed up hearing of the matters and the issue you spoke about, delays. When we go to a courtroom, we realize that most judges in Ghana use longhand in recording their proceedings. But if you begin to, which already is started, you begin to have all these courts in Ghana digitalized, then it will actually help in speeding up the hearing of cases.
Please hold for me, Mr. Chiayeboa. Let me also bring in Dr. John Osai Kwapong. Two-pronged question. One, what are the real benefits you see that this law house will deliver to Ghana as a whole? And also from the standpoint of the symbolism, what do you see? After 2 decades, this has finally come to fruition. What's your take?
Thank you very much. So for me, any steps that can be taken to make the access to justice or any of the services that are rendered by the Office of the Attorney General, the Ministry of Justice, or even our courts is always a step in the right direction. And so that for me is what makes this of real benefit to everyday Ghanaians. If you also think about the different offices, as per my reading, what will be contained in this law house, it also makes it very sort of this idea of a one-stop shop, right? That instead of depending on what lawyers, attorneys, citizens are trying to get, right? That you can sort of access any of those services from one central location. So again, it eases hopefully one's access to all the different things that one may want from the AG's office or from the Ministry of Justice or from some of the courts that will be the courthouses that will be housed in there. And then for me, even the working spaces, right, that those who are part of the AG's office or the Ministry of Justice, even as the Deputy AG was saying that some have had to work in quote-unquote containers. You'll be amazed that the physical space that a worker inhabits can even inhibit his or her productivity and efficiency. So all of this, for me, becomes very important and offers good benefits to the citizens of Ghana. I mean, if you think about the symbolism of it, right? I mean, this is a profound statement. I mean, if you look at the nature of the building with a big symbol on it that says the Law House, that one can look at it and say, I mean, in principle, we do stand for justice, and this is embodied in even this kind of imposing architecture. I always say that when you get to a place like Washington, D.C., and you see the architecture of the different government agencies, as well as the congressional building, if you look at the the courts. They are imposing, and for me, it sort of communicates that message of the things that are important, the things that the country stands for. And so I'm just hoping that we live that symbol of we embody, law and justice in a country like Ghana.
Dr. Osaikopon, you talked about productivity and efficiency. I'm just trying to understand, are you saying that this would in any way improve or facilitate justice delivery, particularly in the dispensation of our judicial systems in the country?
Yes. Sometimes, let me tell you a personal story. So years ago, for example, I visited a friend who was working at a mental health facility in Accra, right? And one of the things he talks about it is like, look at the space in which I work, and I have to see patients, and think about how that even affects my everyday, productivity, right? And so such for me, if I think back to that story and compare it to this ultra-modern facility with all of the bells and whistles that comes with it, you can think about how it facilitates the work that can be done. I mean, the improved technology. The Deputy AG mentioned all the digital access to court records, being able to access cases in real time, etc., etc. That, again, for me, does improve efficiency and productivity.
Okay, please hold for me. Let me go back to the Deputy Attorney General. I'm curious about the estimated total, if you may. How much did it cost us to put up this edifice? I mean, very laudable, but how much did it cost the country?
I'll be able to tell you offhand how much the edifice cost, but I know as a fact that for the last 5, 6, 7 years, every year, Parliament has making provision for the funding of this edifice. But I'll be able to get you exactly how much it has cost us so far, perhaps when you get back to me within the day or another time, yes.
Okay, Benjamin.
Well, interesting thoughts there. So by and large, as we move away from the conversation about the law house, in the immediate term, Alfred Tiayabwa, what are some of the benefits, I mean, we stand to accrue from this building that now has been inaugurated between now and election 2024? How is it going to be maximized in terms of its use?
Yes. From now up to election 2024, the attorneys or the staff of the ministry will move into this building. We'll start working from there. When it comes to the review of dockets, whether we are to give legal advice, whether to review a criminal docket or any other thing, with this edifice and with the space created, the attorneys will have that kind of peace of mind. We have that kind of congenial environment, review dockets and come out with good opinion. I'm not saying that we are not doing it now because we are in this we are in the old building, no. But as Dr. Akufo said, when it comes to the work environment and how you see it, and definitely if you're in a very good work environment, it plays on your mindset and how you're going to also take certain decisions. So we expect that from now to December, what we are supposed to do as attorneys, we'll continue to do it. You know, a lot of people access our office, especially when it comes to criminal matters. People send a lot of petitions. And when petitions are sent, they go through a lot of process before we're even able to come out with an opinion, whether to prosecute or not to prosecute. And those who access it, sometimes they are even the accused persons, sometimes even complainants. But because of the numbers that we have, it sometimes takes a lot of time to go through a process to get advice rendered. But with this edifice, and if God will be able to get more attorneys, it will mean that a lot of hands will be at play and we can work on cases expeditiously so that whether accused persons or complainants can get to know what their fate should be when it comes to prosecution of matters in court.
Before you take leave of us, just a bit of a curiosity. Yesterday, the president also touched on corruption. He said that the former president had called him the chief clearing agent and that for him, he would always stick to due process. How is the law house, if I may, going to assist the fight against corruption, if any?
Yes. The law house also houses the Minister of Justice, as you know. And so when it comes to the administration of justice, we play a key role. And due process actually also is about justice. And as the president said, when it comes to the fight against corruption, you cannot just pick someone from his home and then deal with him the way that you want to deal with him because the person is alleged to be corrupt. If a person is alleged to be corrupt, the person has to go through the process of investigation. After the person has been investigated and a docket is built, then the AG's office is given that docket to review. Now we have the OSP that's dealing with corruption-related matters. But aside from those matters, there are other cases of stealing of public funds, etc., etc. So when it comes to this corruption fight, I agree with Mr. President. It is not as if you can do whatever that you want because you want to fight it, dissect all processes, and then move on. We advise the government, we advise the president, and so as and when issues come up and we need to research and advise him properly as to the way to take, definitely this one is going to help us. But corruption fight, my brother, if I'm to tell you, it is a collective fight. I've met people who sometimes ask me, so DAG, why is it that cases have been in court, you're having this case and it has taken you X amount of years? I tell the person, you cannot sidestep due process. If you take an accused person to fight for his right when it comes to criminal defense for 3-4 years and the law permits it, we cannot stop the process. So we must all also agree that in the fight against corruption, we cannot ignore due process. And that's the point that the President made yesterday.
Well, Mr. Chiaibwa, we're grateful that you took the time to join us this morning. And before you go, I would just like to add, Mr. President was lauding the Attorney General, and that also, I believe, stretches to you and the other Deputy AG. We salute all of you for the work you've done in making this law house materialize. So congratulations to you as well.
Thank you very much, my brother.
And that is the Deputy Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, Alfred Chiaibwa. I don't know whether you have any thoughts on this for Dr. Osai-Kwapong before we proceed with the main conversation. But we're also focusing on the corruption fight and what both parties have been saying. Now, President Akufo-Addo is saying that he has done better in the fight against corruption compared to former President Mahama. Let's start from there with you, Dr. Osai-Kwapong. Your take, based on what you heard Mr. President say yesterday and the record of this administration, which is in the twilight of its period. But before we take your reaction, let's actually listen to what Mr. President said.
Despite the ugly noises, the fight against corruption.
This change will also see the most far-reaching and detailed investigation of the many allegations of corruption and scandals leveled against public officials and their families and friends. This change will help to abort this administration's plan to foist the pliant vice president on us, to cover up for them, and thereby escape the searing scrutiny of accountability. But as I have stated, this hot spotlight of accountability is reserved not only for appointees of this administration, it will also be available to sanctioned persons in my own administration who engage in similar conduct. The same anti-corruption strategies and instruments I shall deploy to measure and punish the MPP government appointees will also be applicable to my own appointees. In short, in Ghanaian parlance, Aba Yadibo Techino, Yadibebo Banso. My dear youth, the best of Ghana is yet to come, and I have hope for the future. Particularly as I return to the presidency as the experienced, visionary, and decisive leader ready to build the Ghana we want together with you. The Electoral Commission has decided to conduct a mop-up voter registration exercise between 1st August to 3rd August, realizing that many could not participate in the just completed limited registration exercise. I still do not understand why the Electoral Commission in cahoots with government insists it will not bring the voters' registration centers to the doorstep of the people as much as possible in order that all of you can have the opportunity to.
Despite the ugly noises, The fight against corruption has been the cornerstone of my administration. With a clear understanding that corruption thrives in an atmosphere conducive to its concealment, and that access to information is a vital tool in the fight against corruption. My government in its first term ensured the passage of the Right to Information Act, 2019 Act 989, in order to give true meaning and effect to Article 21, Clauses 1F of the Constitution. The Act, which successive governments have failed to pass, sees to the implementation of the constitutional right to information held by a public institution to foster a culture of transparency and accountability in public affairs, subject to exemptions, necessary and consistent with the protection of the public interest in a democratic society. The Act is now being fully implemented, with the governing board chaired by an experienced and respected retired High Court judge. The Ministry of Information has trained information officers in various ministries, departments, and agencies of government to support the full application of the law. Administratively, a series of other far-reaching measures have been undertaken by my government to help in the fight against corruption. A memorandum of understanding on information exchange and collaboration in combating corruption and crime in general has been signed by SRAJ, IOCO, Parliament, the Office of the Attorney General, the Audit Service, the Police Service, the Financial Intelligence Center, the Narcotics Control Commission, the Internal Audit Agency, the National Investigations Bureau, and the Office of the Special Prosecutor to this end. The use of technology has been pivotal in our efforts to combat corruption. We have introduced digital platforms for public procurement processes, reducing human intervention and minimizing the opportunities for corrupt practices. These platforms have increased transparency, efficiency, and competitiveness in public procurement, ensuring that public resources are judicially used for the benefit of all Ghanaians. Before I conclude, Madam Chief Justice, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure we are all aware of the statement by the former president and perennial NDC presidential candidate, John Dramani Mahama, stigmatizing me as a clearing agent, because for him, mere allegation without more is enough to merit condemnation of an accused public official, especially one of my administration. For my part, and let me state it again for the record, I will not set aside due process and the rules of natural justice on the altar of the fight against corruption, no matter how much opprobrium this position incurs for me.
Well, you heard the former president lampooning the current president and the current president giving response to the former president. So my question stands, Dr. Osai-Kwapong. When you look at the trajectory and what the president said vis-a-vis what the former president said, what is your reading of the matter? You would have to unmute. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
You can hear me now. So, respectfully, I think that position is also what has hurt the president and on the issue of corruption. I've said this on this platform. I've said it in other places that I agree in principle with the president when he said this due process issue. He's framed it differently before, where he says, look, not until you find yourself on the wrong side of the law, or at least you find yourself being accused of having broken the laws, you would not have a deep appreciation for the rule of law and natural justice. It's a position he holds very strictly and he holds very rigidly. And I understand that to an extent, in the sense that you want, whenever any allegations are leveled against any individual, whether a public official, whether a regular citizen, you want to make sure that due process, you enjoy due process, right? So the right to a free trial, the presumption of innocence, etc., etc. I understand all of that. And so I agree in principle with the president when he says the fact that allegations of corruption has been leveled against someone in my administration, that it becomes the basis for which you deny that accused person due process and natural justice. But what has hurt the president, in my opinion, is that the issue of corruption is also not something that you always want to subject to strict legal proof. That is because it also has political dimensions and political implications, right? And so it is that non-legal approach to dealing with corruption that I believe has hurt the president, in the sense that there are ways in which you can also deal with allegations of corruption, right? So, for example, if you adopt an approach of zero tolerance for corruption, which means that you say in no uncertain terms to people who serve in your administration is, look, I know you are good people. I know that, quote unquote, you would not engage in, any acts that would tarnish my administration. However, you do know that these are the things that allegations can do. It can taint an administration. It can change how people view an administration. It can undermine positive perceptions, all of those things. So, should any of these issues ever emerge, for example, I'll ask you to step aside until, quote unquote, the due process takes its place. And when the due process at the end of the day says, you're good, you've not been engaged in anything untoward, you can come back and become part of my administration. For me, I think some of those things would have also helped change how citizens began to perceive this administration on the issue of corruption. I mean, Benjamin, think about it, right? In 2017 Afrobarometer, as many as 60% of respondents gave this administration positive ratings when it came to the fight against corruption. In the most recent Afrobarometer in 2022, only 14% gave the administration high marks for fighting corruption. And for me, that is where I believe that this position of it's all about due process, respectfully, has hit this administration, that if you always stick to this rigid, it's all about the law, that you forget to also deal with how perceptions can also even undermine this fight. We've talked about the legal test versus the appearance test on your show, right? So yes, you would always pass the legal test, but it is also that sort of not paying enough attention to the appearance test that has ended up fueling a lot of the perceptions of corruption about this administration. Not, keeping in mind that there's been stories, there's been allegations, there has been issues that have that have emerged, and so for me, that is where I respectfully have some disagreement with the president in terms of this rigid. It's all about due process. You cannot fight corruption and change the perceptions of the general public without paying attention also to the political implications and public perceptions of some of these issues.
All right, let's bring into the conversation now Professor Jampo, and he's a political scientist and lecturer at University of Ghana. Prof, it's good to have you with us. Now, The former president is saying that the current president is a clearing agent, and President Akufo-Addo is saying that the fight against corruption takes due process. Let's do a comparative analysis between these two. Who has demonstrated a will to fight corruption in terms of structural change, legislative reforms, even public perception? Which of these former president, current president has demonstrated a will to actually fight corruption?
But should there be a discussion about this? Are we not in Ghana? Don't we know, don't we see what is going on? I think, for me, there is no point in wasting time talking about this. Look, President Akufo-Addo was given a speech to go and read. And you do not expect speech writers to be fair in their assessment of some of these things. And so they wrote a flowery speech that was read by the president. And it's as simple as that. Where did the president present this speech? I'm told he presented it at a forum of the Ghana Bar Association. And I'm thinking, you see, it is only at
He presented it while inaugurating the Law House yesterday.
Sorry, so there, and it was the participants essentially were lawyers. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Another correction, I am not a lawyer. I'm a student of law. I'm not a lawyer. Thank you.
No, I'm saying the participants at the event were essentially lawyers.
Okay.
Is that right?
Right.
Yeah. So these lawyers who belong to the Ghana Bar Association, in my view, you see, the writer of the speech knew the forum that the president was going to be talking. And so he chose to be flowery. But in my view, these lawyers who belong to the Ghana Bar Association over the years, for the past 7 years, have been sycophantic and have been cowed into submission and by morbid fear of the president. And so the president is aware that he could go say some of these things at such forum and they may even applaud. But I tell you, the president wouldn't have dared saying some of these things at a forum of academics. I was there when he tried to insinuate a possible renaming of the University of Ghana after T.B. Dankwa. And there, in his presence, he saw the reaction. He said, no way. But you were expecting that he was going to, and he knew the forum on which he was going to be speaking, and that these guys have offered sycophantic support to his regime for the past 7 years without seeing anything wrong that he's done. And so that's how come he said what he said. But this is a man who is talking about due process, but who also offered an a clearance of Cecilia Dapa even long before the woman was going to be subjected to the due processes that he is talking about. He had offered a certain clearance to the woman, knowing very well that given the powers that the 1992 Constitution confers on the executive president, once he made that open remark or open statement clearing that the woman, it was going to be difficult for all the other agencies of the state that were investigating her to do things or to come out with findings that would go contrary to what he has said. He knew it. And that's how come the other parties would continue to hang and nothing is being done. Look, when he appointed Martin Amidu as the special prosecutor, I was among the first people, I was among the first to praise him because we knew what Martin Amidu was standing for. Okay, and so we're all excited. He's not a man who flip-flops or who is not committed towards what he sets out to do. But even though we created the Office of the Special Prosecutor, we also went out of our way to frustrate that office such that it will be efficient in fighting corruption. In the end, how did Martin Amidu describe Akufo-Addo? The mother serpent of all corruption. And long before Martin Amidu had spoken, about 2 years before Martin Amidu had spoken, my own teacher, Professor Emmanuel Jimapu, had said, I think on your network or somewhere else, I heard him, that as for President Akufo-Addo, his track record in the fight against corruption is in tatters. He said it long ago. Okay, so go and look at the statistics. How are we doing in terms of corruption perception index? How are we doing? We are at an all-time low in his administration. I heard Dr. Osei, is it Dr. Kwapon talking
Osai Kwapon.
Osai Kwapon talking about CDD Afro-Barometer state. And look at the statistics there. And so it will be, I don't know, power has got its own way of blindfolding people to reality. So when people are in power, they don't see what is real. Tell President Akufo-Addo that I'm telling him that he should be real. He should come and speak to Ghanaians before forming that opinion about his own record in the fight against corruption. I think he's not done well in the fight against corruption. The history of the Republic would always have him as a worst president in terms of virtually everything.
So, Professor Jampo, are you saying...
Don't tell me that you are giving more funding to anti-corruption agents. To do what? We are told that SRAT, for instance, has had its funding increased under this particular administration. And it's a good thing, but you do not increase their funding while at the same time doing things that would make the fight against corruption very difficult. And I think that I was just watching some public accounts committee hearing, and we are told of several contracts that have been awarded to either non-existent bodies or contracts that have been awarded and
Professor Jampo, I have to interject at this point. Are you saying that the President Akufo-Addo, between the two, I mean, we are doing a comparative analysis. Are you saying that he has the least demonstrated will to fight corruption compared to former President John Dramani Mahama? You haven't said anything about the former president.
Because I know that you are discerning Ghanaian and you can think and you can know and appreciate what I'm driving at. There is no comparison. It's light and day. Can't you see? Why do you want me to compare light and a day? Light is light, day is day.
Professor Jampo, we had instances of corruption under former President Mahama. Let me just cite a few for you. I want us, if we're going to go into this, I want us to do it properly so that at least we can reflect. No, hold for me. Hold for me. Right, just hold for me. I want to jog your memory, just so we can have a proper comparative. I'm not saying anything. You read between the lines. We had, for example, the bus branding scandal at the Metro Mass Transit. 3.6 million Ghana cedis involved. It was the Smarties deal. And government had been overbilled by 1.9 million Ghana cedis. It led, though, if you want to look to the extent of it, to the Minister of Transport then, Jifativo, being compelled to resign. And she did. We can go back to the Burkinabe businessman Kanazwe. I remember the Ford Explorer Expedition gift scandal. Though it had been added to the pool, that was no justification. $60,000 worth. Then there's the Jida scandal. Our very own Manasseh Azuria winning all the way in 2013 and what he unearthed. There was the SADA scandal as well, which was supposed to be Ghana's Savannah Accelerated Development Authority, and it showed that some 32+ million which had been paid to plant 5 million trees. And this is why I'm so concerned about some of the tree planting now. They could only account for 700,000 trees. We can talk about the NSS situation in 2014, where officials of what was then the Bureau of National Investigation, now the NIB, uncovered a 7.9 million Ghana cedi rot at the NSS. Some judicial corruption, which can be tied to them as well, because there are three arms of government. And you could talk about the brochure gaffe. I'll end there for the NDC. Ghana's 59th Independence Day celebration at the Black Star Square with innumerable errors, grammatical mistakes, and all of that. We spoke about it, but people had been paid for this work. When it comes to Nana Addo, this administration, we can start looking, for example, at the 1.22 billion Ghana Card project and some issues to do with it. We can look at the Bost contaminated fuel saga, 15 million lost to Ghana. The claim about $100,000 being paid, the cash for seat saga, Maslock issues. We can look at the procurement breaches. I mean, the PPA boss, Ejenim Boateng Ejay, among others. The 18 million Ghana cedis at a point that we claimed we had spent on planting for food and jobs, the $178 million Kelly GVG issue. And even moving away from the past, coming into the current, we can talk about the Infraco issue and the storm it has raised. We can talk about SML and others. So I don't want us to situate it in broad oddities. I want us to situate them in the proper context. If you put side by side the scandals under former President Mahama, the scandals under this administration, and we'll pose that same question to Edem Senanu and Dr. Osai Kwapong. Professor Jampo, is it light and darkness, night and day, as you say? Your thoughts?
I knew of all, in fact, you have chronicled a few of the scandals. But if you really want to, I know you've done that because we don't have a lot of time. But if you really want to go into it, then you see more of such corruption scandals in this regime compared to the previous one. And I'm saying these scandals plus what is done about them, plus the posturing and utterances of officials about them, all feed into the generation of the figures and statistics for our corruption perception indices. And it was because of that that I tried to lump all of them together and ask that you do a simple side-by-side comparison of the various CPIs under the two regimes. And it is a clear case of day and light. You are telling me that there is no corruption scandal in this particular regime that should necessitate the prosecution and the jailing of anyone. Abu Gapele was jailed by his own government. And you think that we can't find some in this regime? All these are the kinds of things that feed.
The president says due process. Due process must be followed. That's what the president says.
Oh, due process. Yeah, but we cannot follow due processes in perpetuity. We cannot follow due processes if you give an a priori clearance of people who are expected to go through due process. I'm using the Cecilia Dafa case as an example again, that given the tone, given the utterance of the president around the time that the woman had not gone through any process, we all knew that it was not going to end anywhere. And today, here we are with the case. And so, don't behind the scenes stampede the process and publicly come and tell us that we believe in due processes. He was the one who said that he was going to use the ANAS principle in fighting corruption, even though I disagree with that principle. What is the stake of his usage of that principle in a fight against corruption. So please, I think that, like I said, he was given a flowery speech to go and read to a certain audience that I have described as sycophantic. And he knew that, well, these guys, they would end up even applauding me. That's why he went to see that. But he couldn't have read the statement to you guys in the media. He wouldn't have done that to an assemblage of critical minds or an assemblage of critical minds. He wouldn't have done that in the midst of academics. He wouldn't have done that. So please,
Right.
I think that for me, if you say we should compare, it creates an impression that we are not clear even in our minds as to who has done what and who didn't do what. Please, we know what is happening. For this particular regime, they are telling us that in spite of all the scandals, everybody is okay. No problem. I think at the end of the day, the good people of Ghana, they are watching and they know what the realities of the situation, are.
All right.
It doesn't lie in the mouth of any executive president who has been given a speech to go and read to come and tell us that he has done better in fighting corruption than anybody. Corruption is corruption. We were not so happy with what was happening in the NDC's regime. That was why we felt that, look, we should kick out that regime for a better regime.
Right.
And it appears that we have sold our color television to go and buy black and white.
Thank you so much, Professor Jampo. I want to bring in Edem Senanu from the Citizens Movement Against Corruption in the conversation now. And I'm sure you've been following to this point. I mean, based on the issues, the scandals that Ben just chronicled, and the utterances of both the former president and the current president, who among these two would you say has demonstrated a will to fight corruption? Or what's your take on this issue in the first place?
Well, I don't think at the moment we are doing too good at all. And it looks like each dispensation, we seem to be declining in terms of the robustness with which we are tending to issues that arise and a commitment to ensuring that we are dealing with graft. And I think that the various benchmark assessments, if you take the CPI, our best performance ever was in 2014, when we had 48 points. I think the period 2013 to 2015 appears to have been our best performance. Under this dispensation, it looks like the best performance is actually the lowest in the previous regime. It tells you that we need to take this a lot more seriously. Indeed, we have been stagnant for the last 4 years on the CPI at 43. And most analysis shows that countries that stagnate, they tend to then have a faster decline subsequently. And so we are at risk of actually seeing a situation where the fight may just bottom out and then we are not making any gains at all. So in my view, we don't seem to have done as well as the previous regime, even though with the previous regime, we were not even satisfied. So it is not a situation where we can compare and say, therefore, A was better than B. No. I think that what happens is that there are new forms of graft that come up, new strategies being adopted by those in that space. And in each dispensation, one needs to configure and strategize how you're going to tackle corruption. And so the comparison may not always be, is a apples versus apples situation. That's not the scenario.
Are you saying we're experiencing a new form of graft? What we saw under former President John Dramani Mahama's regime and what we're experiencing now, there are some differences, which is also accounting for the stagnation you talk about. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not connecting the stagnation to it, but what I am saying is that each dispensation will have its own forms of corruption and graft, some new, some old, which leadership is required to strategize on how are we going to deal with this and work strongly together, collaborating with the stakeholders in the space. And I think that if we're doing a lot more of that, would see greater inroads in tackling corruption in our country. At the moment, I think that the CPI speaks for itself. It says that Ghana has stagnated. We are nowhere near the high level of 48 points we had in 2014. I think that also speaks for itself. It suggests that something was done a bit better, if not much more better, in the previous regime. And so instead of patting ourselves on the back, we need to bring ourselves to the table and say, what do we need to do to move this battle, this fight much more further than we have achieved so far?
The president is saying that the fight against corruption takes due process. How do you react to that?
It's a challenging comment for me because, Article 284 talks about how a public officer should not put himself or herself in a position of potential conflict of interest, especially as it affects the performance of their functions. Now, it seems to me that any time we have had the president pass comments, as in the Cecilia Dapa or Chamawon to me situation and this recent one, it has been that the president is conflicted. And he may not be clear in his mind that really what he's doing is putting himself in a position of a conflict of interest because his association with particular people make him feel that they are innocent or potentially innocent, and he goes making statements that signal a certain trajectory, and that could influence the institutions that are mandated to investigate these issues. In my mind, therefore, even when he talks about due process, he's blinded by the fact that there are situations where he's not actually following due process. In my mind, he's not following the legal requirement that don't put yourself in a position of potential conflict of interest. Therefore, recuse yourself, don't make a comment, stay neutral. That allows objectivity to be the order of the day. So I think that the emphasis on due process is not cutting it. And I think that really at this point, we should all be saying, bring the stakeholders to the table, let's analyze where we are, let's take a serious look at where we have failed and begin to try and address the gaps that we have seen in the past few years.
Adam, so as we cap off the conversation, I'm going to throw this question to you, to John Osai-Kwapong, to Professor Jampo, as we begin to wrap the conversation. The former president says, Akufo-Addo, you're a chief clearing agent. The current president says, I'm merely following due process. You were more corrupt than I was. But when you look at the tail of the tape, John Osai-Kwapong just reminded us of the fact that just how many years ago, if you looked at the public trust, confidence in the fight against corruption, it stood at around 60%. The last time, I believe it was last year, it had dwindled to 14%, 46% falling off. In this current administration, I don't know who has faced the music in terms of corruption-related matters. I'm talking about going into the cooler for any. The former president will cite Abu Gapile, among others, which Professor Jampo has mentioned. So my question then is, who has the upper hand, realistically, weighing both sides in the fight against corruption? How would you rank the two? That's the first one. And secondly, since the former president is trying to get back into office, do you trust him to do the right things in the fight against corruption this time round? I'll start with you, Edem Senanu. Those two questions. Who has the upper hand? Do you trust the former president?
Well, I don't know whether it's about trust. I think usually it's the historical record of what you've done. And I refuse to do some of these comparisons because, as I said, sometimes the factors are not exactly the same.
So let me put it this way. Which one has performed better?
But clearly in terms of the various assessments that have been done, it appears that the regime of the NDC had done something much better than the current regime. And it's not because it's a personal assessment as much as it is what the results are showing. And so I think that just looking at the two regimes and comparing them in terms of, we know that if you take the CPI, it became comparative, I think, in 2012, in terms of a reference or benchmark. So if I use that, in my view, it looks like we are not doing as well under this regime than we did in the previous one. And I guess that those who were involved in whichever regime will take the credit for that. Now, what was your second question?
Do you trust the former president? You had already started touching on that.
Well, to be honest with you, I have great difficulty when I listen to all the candidates. When the former president was speaking recently about corruption, what I didn't hear was what exactly is going to do differently. I could hear I'll go after all officials in this government who are not doing what is right, and anyone in my government. But you know, it's about strategy. And I wish that on the political platform, we'll hear a lot more about the strategy. So at this point, I'm neutral. I'm not clear in my mind that Party A or Party B has the best offerings at the moment. I'm waiting to see how things pan out. And so I'm not entirely convinced that I'm hearing what it takes to make the difference in terms of what we will do going forward.
All right.
Same question, Professor Jampo, and then we'll do Dr. Kwapong, and it's a wrap.
Okay, I mean, whether we trust John Mahama or not, I kept asking myself some time ago that why would somebody want to become a president just for one term and go? And why is the person so upbeat and so interested in doing that? And then I answered later that probably he is interested in leaving a certain legacy. I thought that Akufo-Addo, his age, and given that 10, he was going to put that beyond a good legacy for Ghana, legacy out at any time. He was this president that we had. But I strongly that.
Professor Jampo, for some reason we are struggling with your connection. I don't know whether you could move away just a little. I don't know. It's breaking.
Okay, is it better?
It's better now.
Okay, so I was saying that I feel that I can trust President Mahama now because it appears he just wants to be in office to correct wrongs that we have done in time past and to leave a legacy. I was expecting President Akufo-Addo to have preoccupied himself with this, given his age. I was hoping that, look, he's seen it, given it, that if it is age. And so he's right to doing things that a certain positive legacy that he is. He's not in to look at France and so on, that he's not interested in election. And so that he then that to have a certain letter in Joma.
Okay.
If truly interested in what is a legacy, then have capacity in doing that out. The other about
you would have to just reposition again as you make that final point. Just reposition again.
Yeah, the other bit about who has done better. I think that it is the track record, what has happened in the past and what is happening today that we can use in doing any meaningful scientific, comparison. Look, to the extent that the West of the previous regime is better than the good, of the current regime. Any meaningful, any well-meaning, discerning Ghanaian would be able to tell you that then, look, we didn't like the West, but it seems to be better than what is happening now. So what will be the assessment? The assessment is that even though the West wasn't good,
okay.
Then you would go for what you didn't like.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
But I want to hope and believe that
right.
As some of these discourses go on, those who are looking for power would also be listening and knowing that, look, An F is an F. If you come to the university, if you score 44%, it's an F. If you score 26%, it's also an F.
Okay.
Even though 44 is better than 26.
All right.
And so then it's a call on both, on the opposition that is seeking to get into power again. That you do more to correct what we didn't like if you get the mandate to govern again.
All right. Prof. Jampo, we're so grateful for your time this morning. We'll do Dr. John Osai-Kwapong and wrap it up. Your take, Dr. Kwapong?
So yes, I mean on the first question, if again you go back to the one Afrobarometer that occurred under President Mahama's regime, former President Mahama's regime, 2014, only 25% rated the fight against corruption very positively. Yes, in the most recent 2022, that has gone down to 14%. So for me, as Professor Jampo just said, it's a question of lessons learned and what would you do differently, because whether you get a 44 or a 20 is both an F. And I think for me, that's the reminder to the former president that even though perceptions have worsened under this administration, back then, the perceptions were not the most glamorous either. If you look at Mo Ibrahim's Index of African Governance, and on the question of absence of executive corruption, yes, there's been a drop between the Mahama administration and the current administration. For me, at the end of the day, on the question of whether should the former president win the presidency and become president again, the key thing for me is lessons learned. What those perceptions did to hurt his administration, the narrative about him in the lead up to the 2016, and the will to do it and address it very differently, so that some of those past perceptions can be corrupted. For me, the saving grace is not so much that whoever has come after you has performed worse, but it's more of on your own merit. How do you, correct some of the past missteps and fighting corruption differently than you did in the past?
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. John Osai-Kwapong. The question was simply, who has the superior record in terms of the fight against corruption? And our guest who joined us for the conversation was Dr. John Osai-Kwapong, a CDD fellow. That's the Center for Democratic Development. Professor Jampo, a senior political science lecturer at the University of Ghana. And Edem Senanu with the Citizens Movement Against Corruption. Thank you, gentlemen.
We also did have a Deputy Attorney General, Alfred.
Yes, we did. Yes. And so that's about that, Benjamin. Stagnation, we're not moving forward. Whether it's due process or not, this is what we have.
It is what it is.